This is the Business Blackbook, where billion-dollar empires are built and collapse. $4.5 billion. Not stolen from a corporation, not taken from a faceless institution, stolen from the people of Malaysia, from teachers, from farmers, from fishermen who never once heard the name Jho Low. $4.5 billion siphoned, laundered, and spent on yachts, Picassos, and Hollywood films, while the nation that owned the money never saw a single cent. This is the story of the greatest financial heist a government has ever committed against its own people. And tonight, we open the Black Book on 1NDB. Let us set the scene. The year is 2009. Malaysia is a country on the rise. Palm oil exports are booming. The skyline of Kuala Lumpur is climbing higher every year, and a new Prime Minister, Najib Razak, has just taken office with a bold promise. He will build a sovereign wealth fund, a war chest for the future of Malaysia, a vehicle to invest in infrastructure, energy, and prosperity for generations to come. He calls it One Malaysia Development Berhad. 1NDB. It sounds noble. It sounds visionary. And that is exactly what they needed it to sound like. Because on page 1 of the Black Book, the very first rule of financial crime is this: the greatest frauds are always dressed in the language of patriotism. But behind the press releases and the ribbon cuttings, a 27-year-old Malaysian socialite with no official government title, no political mandate, and no experience managing sovereign funds, was already writing himself into the center of everything. His name was Low Taik Jho. The world would come to know him simply as Jho Low. Now, who is Jho Low? On paper, he was a well-connected businessman, a graduate of the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, a man who seemed to know everyone: Saudi princes, Abu Dhabi royals, Wall Street bankers, Hollywood celebrities. He had a gift, an almost supernatural ability to walk into any room and make powerful men believe he was more powerful than they were. But look closer at the pages of the Black Book, and you begin to see something different. You begin to see a man who was not managing wealth. He was manufacturing the illusion of wealth and using that illusion to access real money. Here is how it worked. When 1NDB was established, it needed partners. It needed investors. It needed credibility. Jho Low positioned himself as the informal bridge between the Malaysian government and Middle Eastern sovereign wealth. He told Malaysian officials he had relationships with Abu Dhabi's royal investment funds. He told Abu Dhabi's people he had the ear of Malaysia's prime minister. He was playing both ends of the same rope, and for a while, no one checked whether the rope was real. The first major deal came in 2009. 1MDB formed a joint venture with a company called Petro Saudi International, the Malaysian fund would contribute $1 billion in capital. PetroSaudi would contribute oil field assets supposedly worth $1.5 billion. Here is what actually happened. $700 million of that $1 billion was wired out of the joint venture account within days of the deal closing. Not to PetroSaudi, not to any oil field, but to a shell company called Good Star Limited, registered in the Seychelles and controlled by Jho Low himself. $700 million in the first transaction. Before the ink on the partnership agreement had even dried. The Black Book calls this move the empty box. You convince someone to invest in a box, and before they can look inside, you have already removed everything from it and filled it with paperwork. But 700 million was only the beginning. What happened next required a co-conspirator of a much higher order, and that is where we arrive at a name that will appear again and again and again in the pages of this ledger: Goldman Sachs. Now, Goldman Sachs is not a villain in a movie. It is one of the most prestigious investment banks on the planet. But inside Goldman's bond division, there was a banker named Tim Leissner, and Tim Leissner wanted to do business in Southeast Asia at any cost. Between 2012 and 2013, Goldman Sachs helped 1NDB raise $6.5 billion through 3 bond issuances. These were not small transactions. These were massive, high-profile bond deals sold to pension funds and institutional investors around the world. Goldman charged fees that were extraordinary. For typical sovereign bond deals, a bank might charge a fee of between 0.1 and 0.5%. Goldman charged between 9 and 10% on these deals. On $6.5 billion, that translated into approximately $600 million in fees. The question that every regulator would eventually ask was simple. Why would a sovereign wealth fund pay 10 times the normal fee rate to raise money? The answer, buried deep in the Black Book, is that Goldman wasn't just raising money. Goldman was providing legitimacy. Every institutional investor who bought those bonds assumed Goldman Sachs had done its due diligence. Every pension fund assumed that a bank of Goldman's reputation would not sell them paper backed by fraud. They assumed wrong, because the bonds were guaranteed not by real Malaysian government assets, but by a web of Abu Dhabi-linked entities that Jho Low had constructed with forged signatures and fabricated endorsements. And the money those bonds raised flowed directly into the machine. Now, let us talk about the machine. The mechanics of this fraud deserve their own chapter in the Black Book, because what Jho Low constructed was not a simple theft. It was a system, an industrial-scale money laundering operation that spanned at least 10 countries and involved shell companies, offshore accounts, real estate purchases, wire transfers, and some of the most creative financial structuring the world has ever seen. Step 1. The money leaves 1MDB through fake investment vehicles, joint ventures, and inflated fees paid to shell companies. Step 2. The money passes through a series of offshore accounts in the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore, and Luxembourg. Each transfer adds a layer of complexity. Each new account is owned by a new legal entity. Each new entity is owned by yet another entity. The paper trail becomes a labyrinth. Step 3. The clean money, now separated by 5 or 6 layers of transactions from its original source, arrives in the hands of the inner circle. And what did they do with it? This is where the Black Book becomes almost unbelievable. Jho Low spent $700 million on himself in the span of just a few years. He purchased a super yacht called the Equanimity, valued at $250 million. He bought a private jet. He purchased Picasso paintings and Monet originals. He threw a birthday party for himself in Las Vegas that cost more than $1 million in a single evening. He gifted a $130 million yacht to a Saudi prince as a gift. He spent tens of millions of dollars in nightclubs across New York, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, popping champagne that cost $40,000 a bottle, tipping waitresses with checks for the equivalent of $250,000. He became the most extravagant party host in the world, and the world's most glamorous people happily accepted the invitations. But the Black Book does not let us forget something critical. Every dollar he spent was a dollar that was supposed to build schools, roads, hospitals, futures for 29 million people who were never invited to the party. Now, let us talk about Hollywood, because this is where the story takes a turn that most financial crime documentaries would not dare include. Jho Low became a film producer. Using funds traced back to the 1MDB machine, he co-financed some of the most successful Hollywood films of the early 2010s. The movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, a film about financial fraud and excess, was partly financed with money stolen from the Malaysian people. The irony is so dark, it almost feels like a confession. He also financed Dumb and Dumber 2. He produced Daddy's Home. He became friends with Leonardo DiCaprio, with Jonah Hill, with Paris Hilton. He gifted DiCaprio a Pablo Picasso painting worth $25 million. He gifted a $12 million pink diamond necklace to Australian model Miranda Kerr. And here is the thing about celebrities. They did not ask where the money came from. They did not need to, because the money moved like legitimate money. It wore the right clothes, it had the right paperwork, it sat in the right accounts. This is page 47 of the Black Book. And the lesson is one of the most important ones we will ever record. Clean money and dirty money look identical when they are moving at speed through enough jurisdictions. The velocity of the fraud was its greatest disguise, but the ink was already beginning to smudge. In 2015, a journalist named Claire Rucastle Brown, running a small but ferocious investigative blog called Sarawak Report, began publishing internal documents, bank records, wire transfer confirmations, emails. At the same time, the Wall Street Journal published a bombshell investigation revealing that nearly $700 million had flowed directly into personal bank accounts belonging to Prime Minister Najib Razak himself, not into 1MDB, not into a government account, into Najib personal accounts. $681 million. Najib's government scrambled. His attorney general declared the money a donation from the Saudi royal family. The Saudi government, confusingly, neither confirmed nor denied this. The explanation was so thin, you could see through it in daylight. But in Malaysia, Najib still controlled the levers of power. He dismissed his attorney general. He disbanded a parliamentary committee investigating 1NDB. He deployed the police to raid the offices of investigators. He used the power of the state as a weapon against the truth. For a moment, it seemed like the machine would survive. For a moment. The Black Book might stay closed. Then came 2016 and the United States Department of Justice. The DOJ filed what became the largest kleptocracy asset seizure in American history. They moved to seize over $1 billion in assets linked to 1NDB. The filing named Jho Low directly. It named Malaysian Official Number 1, a designation every journalist in the world immediately understood to mean Najib Razak. The Americans were not investigating out of altruism. American banks had been used. American financial systems had been penetrated. American laws, specifically the Anti-Money Laundering Statutes and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, had been violated on American soil. And the Department of Justice does not forgive trespasses into its jurisdiction. Asset seizures began. The superyacht Equanimity was seized in Indonesia. Luxury real estate in Beverly Hills and New York was frozen. Bank accounts in Switzerland were locked. Paintings were identified. Diamonds were traced. The machine, which had run so smoothly for so long, had left fingerprints everywhere. And now, law enforcement agencies in 6 countries were dusting every surface. Back in Malaysia, something remarkable happened. In 2018, Najib Razak's ruling party, which had governed Malaysia for 61 consecutive years without interruption, lost the general election. The man who defeated him was 92 years old. His name was Mahathir Mohamad, and he had once been Najib's own political mentor. Within days of the new government taking office, Najib was barred from leaving the country. His wife's luxury handbag collection was seized by police, and when investigators entered properties linked to Najib and his family, they removed 284 boxes of handbags, valued at $273 million, 50 ring boxes containing diamond jewelry, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash in multiple currencies, stuffed in closets, in luggage, in storage rooms. A prime minister and his wife had turned the machinery of a sovereign wealth fund into a personal shopping account. In 2020, Najib Razak was convicted on 7 counts of corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison and fined 210 million ringgit. He appealed. The appeal failed. In 2022, he was taken directly from the courtroom to begin his sentence. Malaysia, finally, had closed one chapter of the ledger, but Jho Low remains free. As of the recording of this episode, Low Tak Jho has never been arrested. He has never stood trial. He is believed to be living somewhere in mainland China, beyond the reach of American and Malaysian extradition requests. He communicates occasionally through lawyers and public statements. He denies everything. He is a ghost who once threw million-dollar parties, a ghost who once gifted super yachts like they were birthday cards, a ghost who once sat in a Hollywood premiere watching a movie about fraud that EEE had financed with stolen money. Goldman Sachs eventually settled with the Malaysian government for $3,900,000,000, one of the largest regulatory settlements in banking history. The bank admitted that its subsidiary had conspired to violate American anti-bribery laws. Tim Leisner pleaded guilty and cooperated with federal prosecutors. Singapore shut down several banks. Switzerland prosecuted financial intermediaries. Abu Dhabi figures were investigated. The web stretched across 3 continents and a dozen legal systems. And still, architect walks free. So what does the Black Book teach us tonight? It teaches us that sovereign wealth funds are only as honest as the governments that create them. It teaches us that the prestige of a Goldman Sachs, the prestige of a state-backed bond, can be weaponized as effectively as any forged document. It teaches us that celebrity and social access are not just the rewards of financial crime. They are often the tools of it. And it teaches us something else, something darker, something that every person who has ever placed faith in a government institution should sit with for a moment. The money was never invisible. The wire transfers were in the system. The shell companies were registered. The accounts were opened at regulated banks. The bonds were sold through licensed exchanges. Everything was technically documented somewhere. The fraud did not succeed because it was hidden. It succeeded because the people who had the power to stop it chose to look away, chose to collect their fees, chose to attend the party, chose to cash the check and ask no questions. $4.5 billion gone. A prime minister convicted, a fugitive in China, and the people of Malaysia still waiting for the full accounting of what was taken from them. The machine ran for nearly a decade, fueled not just by greed, but by silence. And in the Black Book, silence has a prize. It always does. And with that, the Black Book closes. Subscribe, and we will open the next page soon.